Welcome back to Potter's Pockets, episode 21, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, chapters 19 through 22. The Servant of Lord Voldemort, The Dementor's Kiss, Hermione's Secret, and the Owl Post again. And back with me are my two esteemed colleagues, Ms. Sarah Miller and Mr. Wes Schantz. Welcome back, you two.
Good to be back. News.
Hello.
And it's good to have you back. Now on this professional version of the Zoom recording software that we are now investing in.
Oh, wait, what does that mean?
Oh, well, so it's $15 a month. And what was really interesting about initially, putting money into it, besides the fact that, always happy to invest in both you, Wes, personally, and your podcast, which I'm now doing, but also just in the time I spend with y'all. It was interesting because when I was first purchasing the software, it was like, okay, well, $140 and save $30 if you do this for a year. And I thought, well, that would be a wonderful thing to try and get the listeners to fund. And if they wanted us to do that sort of thing, if we could raise like $140, then we could get the yearly plan. I can just keep going monthly and tell them, but I thought that would be an interesting idea, if not now, at some point. Just because it seems like people like to fund good things, and especially if they know directly where their money is going to. And so that would be, I think, an interesting idea.
I like it. Sounds good. Fundraiser.
We're like NPR up in here now. And
selling cookies at the supermarket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is our bake sale. Yeah. Okay.
We'd have to, I was just going to say, we'd have to think about the mechanism through which we solicit resources. Just FYI, with something we can slack about this. But.
Yeah, look at us all professional.
Yeah, now using Slack, sort of meeting software, having a professional audio software. We are slowly growing the endeavor. We're acquiring owls as we go, and and capacity, and perhaps our patroni are becoming more defined all along as we try to shed light, or at least cast a little bit of light in the darkness that surrounds us. Yes, the forbidden forest that eternally surrounds us. Okay, so we had some questions about today, and so it seemed like in our pre-show, what we were focusing on is the theme of time and repetition, and specifically how the last two chapters sort of repeat, and how the last chapter specifically is a repetition of the first chapter. And Sarah, you made a point about, actually, what was the other point you made? You made a point about another parallel between two chapters, between Marge's mistake and Hermione's secret. There it was. And so did we want to start with time and repetition, you two?
Yeah, I always found the time turner to be really, really interesting, and partly because what it does is opens up this whole new possibility, which is what's so cool about fantasy in the first place, right? Like, here's a new idea, and look what it does when you have this in the world. And for her to just spring this one on us at the very end of the book is such a awesome move. I thought I always loved the end of this book, and that's part of why I like this book. I think the best out of all of them still, but we'll see how that changes as we go along here and reread more.
Whoa, that's a bold claim, Wes, that this one was your favorite.
Yeah, I think so. I really like one, and I like two. Okay, 3. There's all of the good things about 1 and 2, and then there's just like more. There's like a little hint of what's to come, and then there's just more of that wonder and that like, see this new thing and watch what happens. And literally, right, like, watch yourself out there, seeing yourself casting the spell that saves your life. It's like, it's awesome to just think about, and you can kind of go around and around with it, and it seems to me infinite, actually.
Yeah, and I want to ask you whether another element of this I do want to ask you what you really love about this, because I really love this one too, but something that really appealed to me when I first read it was the idea of getting away from the Dursleys and going to Uncle Sirius's. I know he's a godfather, but like the idea of that sort of loving relationship with like a sort of paternal-esque figure who actually cares for you and will do like fun things with you and teach you cool stuff. That really added a lot to my understanding of it. And I was wondering whether you thought that the Patronus of Harry was a reflection of the fact that he was starting to get a good idea of who his father was through his friends and enemy, through Snape's account of him, through Dumbledore's account of him, through, well, I guess he gets that later, through Lupin's sort of account of him, and of course through Sirius's and Peter's account of him, that he starts to sort of understand the image of the father better so that he can embody it himself. And I don't know, something about that appealed to me. Also, I wanted to mention, you see Hermione being Hermione again, figuring something out before everybody else and not sharing it with them until way later. Typical Hermione stuff, being way ahead of the curve. But yeah, not to jar my first point, but just to add that in.
No, yeah, I loved listening and watching her ask questions of Professor Lupin and Mr. Black. And she does so, I think the narrator describes her as timid, and yet she asks questions that we need answered, but Ron and Harry are, for various reasons, either physically or emotionally, unable to ask or unwilling to ask. But yes, she knew about the time turner, but I just thought she was so gracious under pressure. Like she was so cool and brave to talk to Sirius Black and ask really useful questions. In the Servant of Lord Voldemort chapter is what I meant. And yet it was funny, she was unable to learn the Patronus charm just by listening to Harry. She couldn't do it. She was scared of the hippogriff, of flying on Buckbeak. And yeah, I just thought that was an interesting juxtaposition, like,
and had trouble with the
that I wanted to throw out there.
What's interesting is you just reminded me that it's interesting to what extent a hero's dragon differs for each hero, and how Hermione, her boggart is disappointing McGonagall, is disappointing somebody's expectations. And so insofar she's been even using this time turner to do more work than is possible for a normal human, she has been facing her fears, like kind of full out this term. She has been facing the idea that she might disappoint somebody. And I just thought that was interesting that only really starts to come out when we do use the time turner at the end and realize just how much strain she has been under and what heights she has been striving towards and what she's been able to maintain, frankly speaking, during that. Studying to help Hagrid with his trial with Buckbeak, and even still wanting to be friends with Harry and Ron, though I'm not sure exactly what they offer beyond companionship and, so I suppose, adventure and mischievousness, but not a lot of, like, traditionally speaking, good things for a school. I guess she does have she likes fun, and well, yeah. So I just wanted to say those things.
So you were suggesting, Alex, that he sees his father through the information he gains from other people like Snape and Lupin and Sirius. Do you think that explains why he's able? I'm very confused as to why he sees himself conjure the Patronus. And I had a very crazy conspiracy theory, but I don't think it's totally borne out by the text.
Well, we got to hear it.
But I thought it was maybe Snape, because he's at the lake. He's the one who brings them all up. He's the one who brings them all up to the castle. And we know that his Patronus is a doe. So it's small enough, or like it's a similar shape that I think it could be mistaken, and that it would have cause to pet. I don't know if that works with the geography of the way that the lake is described, but I guess I just wondered, and then I wondered if it was possible how it could be his father, or how it could be him and he didn't recognize. Because if it is him, then doesn't that mean that like they were always meant to go back in time? In which case, I guess I get into this like infinite loop of time that like really makes my brain spin, and then I have to stop thinking about it.
I do think that's rough, the infinite loop. I think symbolically it works in that Harry embodies the image of the father that he did not expect. He thought it was external, but it was actually internal. How the father comes to be is like, you don't wait for the father to come. You start embodying the role of the father. Mm-hmm. Which is what I would say we're trying to do with, being masters of art. Again, if you don't see the role being embodied, just go embody it yourself. And I do think that that's actually the idea behind America, which is a radical one. So instead of getting into the infinite regress idea of like, when is time happening and how many times has this happened and will it ever stop? It makes me think that part of what this time turner is suggesting to us is sort of like what the movies like Groundhog Day do, and that Tom Cruise sort of war movie where he has to relive the same day over and over again. It's sort of what life is an iterating pattern of days that mostly look alike with slight differences as you like slightly scale up in skill up a mountain in like a Purgatorial or Dante way. And as if Hermione is starting to master this concept and is deriving additional sort of exponential benefit from it. Like she takes like twice as many courses as everybody, or 33% more. It's like she's experiencing an appreciation of capital on her natural gifts because of what she's doing. And it just strikes me that I suppose you can read the time turner in a hellish way like you did, like an infinite repetition without change. Does seem to be Dante's idea of hell, and does seem to be very hellish. But I think the Purgatorial view of it is sort of like that, and maybe this isn't supported, but I'm not sure, but that what life is sort of a series, and like I said, of reflecting days that are all pretty similar to each other with a slight arc upwards, or maybe even sort of a sort of vacillating or like sort of sine cosine structure, like wave-like structure, with hopefully the waves tending upwards near the end or something like that. Yeah.
Wes, what do you think?
I think about it like usual in terms of, reading and stuff like that. Well, it's like, every time you open the book, you relive the experience of the book, but you never are the same person that you were the last time you read the book. So it's like, in a sense, yes, they're in a circle because he's come back to save himself, who lives on to save himself by going back to save himself, right? So it's like that is a thing going on, but it's also within the narrative and the way that it's revealed within the narrative. You're moving towards that future, which I think, Alex, you pointed to as another great thing about the end of this book, right? That Harry has that glimpse of hope of getting out of the Dursleys' household, being reunited with this person that was taken from him, and very, very much like his father and mother in that way. That hope is, of course, dashed, but not in a totally tragic way, right? Because he's the one who then rescues Sirius, right? He rescues Buckbeak, and then with Buckbeak rescues Sirius. It's a kind of picture, I guess, of that same circle going on, but one which is moving ahead and moving through a story which has some kind of intention and which conveys some kind of message, aside from like simple recurrence or stasis, and paralysis, maybe even, right? So it's like that. I saw that with with Snape, the way that his body is like knocked out but still like being moved along, like that's a distorted kind of creepy version, I guess. So, and the word that I think the adjective creepy is used multiple times for him, for the way he moves when he's being mobilicorpused by Sirius. It's like that's a, I suppose the Dementors as well are like that too, right? They suck energy in but don't generate anything, so there's like these negative versions of it, and there's obviously this kind of mixed ending to this book where you on the one hand have saved lives and you've rescued the prisoner, but on the other hand you're kind of caught in the same thing. You're going back to the Dursleys' house again, around 4 coming up. It's very interesting to me how those variations are established within the narrative.
Yeah, and I wonder to what extent do either of you think that the repetition at the end of the book is supposed to be indicative of the repetition of the opportunity for Harry to have a family? That and also observing sort of Harry as a repetition of James and how things are going to be slightly different this time around. And oh man, there really is a strong theme of like sameness and difference in the repetition and the patterns of time, right? And because now it's so similar to the past with Harry saving Sirius again, just like James saved Sirius. And then Sirius, like a buddy, can get him back by giving him permission to go to Hogsmeade. But there's sort of a weird sort of Freudian like mistake in there too, right? Like, Sarah, something you mentioned earlier about Lupin palling around with Harry is that, he's a teacher, Harry's a student. They shouldn't be acting like friends. It's sort of the same with Sirius. Like, Sirius is the guardian of Harry, like the father, not the like trading just jokes and sort of favors friends. And I don't know, add in there, I'm not sure exactly what the firebolt is doing in there too. That does strike me as like the perfect like rich uncle gift, but I also don't know if that's exactly a good move as a guardian. So I guess I'm asking about the repetitions and the inversions and the changes, and to what extent Sirius is missing the mark as a potential guardian, or to what extent he was always sort of a will-o'-the-wisp guardian, that he would not have ever been an appropriate guardian for Harry, even though he seemed like he would be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, go for it, Wes. Sorry.
No, you.
No, I was, I understand that, he's been in Azkaban for 13 years for a crime he didn't commit and whatnot, but I do think it's interesting that moment in the Shrieking Shack where he and Lupin are ready to kill Peter, and Harry is the one who says no and posits that the Dementor's kiss would be a better punishment. He wants to make it clear to Peter that he's not doing this out of pity, but he says, I don't think my father would have wanted his two best friends to become killers. And like you said, that's a real inversion of roles. The being led by your emotions, by your gut, by kind of without letting that logos check you, is something that seems childlike. And we've talked previously about how childlike Harry and Ron in particular seem in this book. Everything from fighting with Hermione over a broomstick to their backtalk defiance of a teacher. And even Hermione's got her childish moments, so I would just chalk it up to sleep deprivation. But the way that they go about the different kinds of actions that they take in the Shrieking Shack. Hermione's cool and composed interrogation. Ron willingly tying himself to Peter Pettigrew. I think, Wes, you noted his courage and his willingness to kind of work through the pain. And Harry effectively protects Peter, and later feels like it's going to be his fault that Voldemort comes back if Peter is the one to help him as a consequence. And I just think that's a significant departure from what we've seen of them thus far, but also like if anybody in that room should have been the head of reason, it should have been Professor Lupin in my book, but he wasn't. And I think that is, I don't know, that's something I feel is that sometimes stuck in a high school, I definitely experience like the reversion to the mean, you know, like the temptation to behave like the environment in which you are existing. I don't know that Sirius would have been a good father figure. It might have been a fun father figure. But like, can you really see him telling Harry to do his homework? No. Can you see him punishing him for bad behavior, which we know he's capable of? No. I don't know. Is that where you were kind of going with that, Alex? I don't know.
Yeah, no, and he was riding a motorcycle. He's like a super Uncle Jesse from Full House figure. He strikes me as exactly what a young teenage, starting to be rebellious boy would want his father to be, right?
Which is exactly why kids don't get to pick who their parents are, right? I mean, among many other reasons, but that's why it's good that like your parents, that's why conflict with parents can be so valuable. Like teenagers pushing against their parents, if their parents were just the cool kids who just wanted to be friends with the kid. I mean, gosh, I see that all the time in parents of former students. Like, well, they're going to drink somewhere, so they might as well drink in my basement. Like, first of all, in certain states, that's going to get you arrested as a parent for like reckless endangerment. Second of all, like, that's not your job, right? And yeah, he seems like he'd be cool, but I don't think that doesn't make it good,
Yeah.
I really like that question about what's good versus what's cool is one that I feel like literature is essential for like delving into.
Can you say more? What do you mean? What?
I think it's back on. Yeah, I want to hear that question
okay.
again because it sounded very interesting.
No, yeah, Well, the character of Sirius Black being this kind of ineffable, unattainable thing, that he's out there, but you can't know quite where he is, and he'll sort of contact you by outpost once in a while, but he really fits into that kind of romantic ideal, I think, which is an ideal because you can't ever quite realize it, and there's something very inspiring about that, but also not very practical, and frankly really dangerous, right? Because as he points out, he as good as killed Harry's parents. He did persuade them, and they listened to him, right? Because he's Sirius Black. I mean, what a Mercurial, what a brilliant idea to have Peter Pettigrew, who no one would expect, right, be the secret keeper instead of Sirius. So he.
What?
He.
Yeah. So, he's kind of telling the story for a lot of these 18, 19 chapters here. chapters 18 and 19, that is, he's sort of like, with help from Hermione's questions, filling in some of that stuff that's going on in the background that he sort of represented. But he also can't possibly, I guess he can't really undo the damage that he's done. And I think this goes to your point, right? Like there has to be a new embodiment of those potential things that were mistakes, to correct them. You can't go back and actually undo something. You can only sort of like return and try to elaborate what was there already, right? Like unfold what was there. I think that's kind of what Harry's doing with saving Pettigrew, right? Like he's not able to bring his parents back, but he is able to save someone's life. You know, Pettigrew is one, Buckbeak's another, and Black's a third, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like he's reversing the path of Cain, like improving the chain of fate in that respect, and sort of editing this iteration for the better, improving on his parents' example, because it does sound over and over again from the examples we get about James that Harry is a better guy than James. Like from the view we'll eventually get, James and Sirius are sort of Weasley-like, but sort of in a dark and sort of malevolent way. And Harry seems, you know, he fights for the downtrodden. Neville's his boy, you know. He's a good guy, even though he sometimes gets portrayed as a bad guy and had his struggles in this book. And so, I agree. It's almost as if even the generations are attempting to get the ideal pattern better. And I like also what you say about the Mercurial or Mercutio-like aspect of Sirius on his motorcycle, the loner who you can never quite get right. I wonder to what extent he's like a commentary on the romantic ideal as a failed or a failing or a youthful worldview, one that cannot survive the actual travails of life. And to what extent that'll be symbolically played out with Sirius's fate, I'm really interested to consider.
I think there's a recklessness in Sirius that, like Mercutio, that looks like boldness, looks like resistance to the rules, disobedience, kind of it's flashy and appealing, but I don't know, it may not be wise. And just to kind of go along with the idea that Harry is sort of improving upon the previous iterations. I love that word, by the way, iterations. But, you know, James did save Snape from a terrible fate, right? In the Shrieking Shack or near it. And he didn't do it, though, because he realized, or because of some moral pull. He did it because he, you know, got cold feet at the last minute or was afraid of getting caught or whatever. I think that's part of why Snape is so full of hatred, that he's indignant that like this guy's motivations weren't as rosy as everybody thinks they were. He didn't save me. He like saved himself from getting in trouble. And I don't think the same could be said about Harry's decision to save Peter Pettigrew. And at the end, when Dumbledore tells him that Pettigrew owes his life to him, and that you sent Voldemort a deputy who's in your debt, that it to save a wizard's life creates a certain bond, and this is magic at its deepest, its most impenetrable. And then he said, I knew your father very well, both at Hogwarts and later. He would have saved Pettigrew too. I'm sure of it. Like, I'm not sure of that, based on what we know thus far. And we know that Dumbledore has like not told Harry everything. So I sort of wonder, like, why does Dumbledore paint a rosier picture for Harry than is accurate. And like, is that like a Dumbledore understanding what Harry needs developmentally? I think that might have something to do with it, that maybe at a young age he really can't manage the thought that his father was somehow moderately to severely imperfect. But
that's brilliant. I think that's a brilliant idea that developmentally he's allowing the ideal of the father to encourage Harry until he can differentiate it. I think that's a really big part of it, because especially with the absence of the father in his real life, the absence of and the presence of other father-like figures, but the absence of the father, I think if you present it, and then just to pair with your idea, Alex, about Harry becoming the father, or becoming what he imagines his father was. And it's funny that, not funny, I guess it's interesting that makes him conjure the most powerful Patronus he's ever conjured. It's like not even really a thought that or a memory that he recalls, but it's actually something much more subconscious or existential even, that makes him able to conjure this massive Patronus that casts away, dozens of Dementors, when he really hasn't demonstrated the ability to do that with the memories that he has on his own. And I guess I thought that about Dumbledore for a while, that like, why do you not tell him everything? On the other hand, he's 13. Does he deserve, or should he know everything? Isn't there something to be said for protecting Harry from maybe the unvarnished truth, so that he can, grow up to know enough of himself to be able to see that what he knows of his father is varnished and not complete, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, and another question I would like to append to that for both of you and Wes too is to what extent, sorry, I didn't that addendum, I'm losing my dang question. To what extent, oh no, it'll come back to me, I'm sorry, Wes or Sarah, you can just go on. I just forgot my dang question.
Dude, I really like the way that Dumbledore tells them what they need to do without telling them what they need to do,
Yeah.
With his very brief instruction, which is enough for Hermione to like understand in a flash part of it, and then Harry picks up the other part, which is saving Buckbeak, and how that's like the key to everything as well. But I love how neither of them, nowhere in Dumbledore's instructions is anything said about the Dementors per se, and like Harry saving his own life, but that is like also totally embedded in the kind of person Harry is, that he's gonna go and see like that guy who cast the Patronus and saved my life. Like I have to know if it's my dad, if he's still alive, or some emanation of him is still walking the grounds here. And what I love is that in a way it's like kind of impossible to say whether Dumbledore knows that or not, or just like that's the kind of world that this is, and Dumbledore is like perfectly willing to accept. And I think that's kind of what he's saying about the deepest levels of magic, right? Like this is something which is, and sorry, it's that's basically not something he needs to understand, but just that that's the world that they're in, and he is able to let it sort of run its course. Then the last thing that goes with that though is the prophecy, which Harry sort of like accidentally remembers to tell him, and he sort of like treats it very lightly there. So I didn't know what you guys made of that.
I guess so. If Harry, here's where I get super confused. If Harry hadn't acted upon his own curiosity, he would have died, right? Because it was his Patronus on the side of the lake that saved both him and Sirius on the other side in time 1.0. I guess so. That's where I get kind of confused.
Well, I think
is Dumbledore really willing to risk that, or did he just does he know Harry so well that he knows that Harry won't be able to resist the temptation to find the person that he thinks is his father, and that Dumbledore must know Hermione well enough to know that she'll be able to keep Harry from making themselves known by going after Peter Pettigrew, like that Harry's desire for vengeance is perhaps only tempered by only trumped by his desire to know his father. Like, I guess a part of me sort of wonders if he just knew Harry so well to know that Harry would then go do that. That's an extraordinary show of faith in a kid.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say, at least to the first part of what you just said, that what Harry seems to learn and become capable of doing in casting that Patronus is how to embody the archetype of the father. He gets that energy from providing the safety net necessary to those who need it, rather than in sort of his bar mitzvah, pre-initiation into Patronus ways, waiting for the provision of the father, right? Waiting for Sirius to send him a fireball, waiting for a solution to come to him. But now what he seems to have learned out in the woods, and I do think the end of this sort of has elements of sort of like a shamanic initiation ritual, or a coming to adulthood sort of ritual, is that what Harry has to do is expel the demons of his past in order to embody the father or the hero in the present. So it is the moment itself that requires that he live up to it, that produces the power in him that's necessary to extinguish the Dementors. It's like he rises up and he learns the ultimate lesson in that moment, not just what it was to be his father, but what it is to be the ideal of a father, to provide for those who, to be like Mufasa and provide the world of light, that which the Patronus covers against the darkness, the Dementors, the hyenas.
Right, but what I was suggesting is, does Dumbledore know that Harry is capable of doing that? Like that is, I'm in the throes of planning my winter trimester, and one of our units is supposed to be an ethics unit, and it's a really interesting sounding unit, but my freshmen were a nightmare today in class, and honestly, I don't trust them, and they're 14, to have like serious conversations about ethics, much less go, assume the position of, or assume the role of a father. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. I guess I'm sort of in awe of on the one hand, what he doesn't tell Harry, and on the other hand, what he believes Harry can do. And I think the easy answer is that Dumbledore is like all seeing and all knowing and knows like past, present, and future, and like knew that this was all going to work out. But I guess I'm not satisfied with that. I don't think there's evidence to suggest he did know that, but maybe there is. And he does sort of like smirk here and there, but I don't know. Like, I guess I'm just really impressed that his faith in Harry's ability in the second round using the time turner, that Harry was able to like do the thing that he needed to do. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the way that it seems to work is that Dumbledore has seen Harry produce the Patronus at least once before, back at the the Quidditch match.
Mm.
Even though it wasn't against a real Dementor, as it turns out, right? It was just against Malfoy. But so he knows it from there. But he also, like, by the time that he's telling them that if only they had more time, he's already, again, observed the bizarre coincidence that a powerful Patronus appeared and saved their life. And I take it that he sort of has deduced that it must be Harry himself who did it, and he's put that together with the fact Hermione's got the time turner, and so it's like QED, right, for them to go back and create this bizarre but like inevitable sort of conclusion.
Got it.
Yeah, it's like the way that that's set up, though, hundreds of pages earlier by having Hermione get the time turner and like start Harry's Patronus lessons, all of that stuff remains rather fortunate, I guess.
Yeah, and I was wondering to what extent the end here embodies sort of a typical young adult novel motif, and that there's a sort of overinflation of the both part of the protagonist as well as the skills and abilities of the protagonist, and how that would connect to sort of our idea that Harry has been sort of inflated throughout this text and is focused on things like his Quidditch victories at the expense of his friendship with Hagrid via his inability or his unwillingness, or is just not making time to help out with the Buckbeak trial, and his sort of misprioritizing of things and not prioritizing his relationship with Hermione, though of course she got that very thoughtful gift for him in the beginning, and now we actually see how close he has to get with Hermione at the end of this book, and earns them a spot on the cover together in the American version. That's not Ginny, and I wondered whether y'all thought that the end here was also sort of in line with that idea that the young adult sort of hero has powers, like you were saying, Sarah, far beyond what a normal 13 or 14-year-old would do, like much braver, truly an ideal. And, even braver in terms of taking risks and disobeying things, right? Like going to Hogsmeade could be dangerous in some way. And, I can't imagine, well, it depends, I suppose. But, there are plenty of young people who would not have the courage to try that sort of thing. They'd be too afraid. And so, it's interesting to what extent he is so much more, or is supposed to stand above, even though in a way it's like he's like an imperfect representation himself. It's as if, I don't know, if I were going to say something interesting, it's as if it's a modern figure of the divine, and the rather than just having an imperfect God as in a suffering God on a cross, it's sort of a young scarred boy. And I don't know, a lot of people seem to have read this, and I wonder if it's because in some way.
I think that's. You trailed off there, but I wasn't sure if I just wasn't hearing you. But if that's the case, then again, Dumbledore is like our image for what faith looks like, or something like that, and that's interesting because he is like a very high bar to try to be like, and I don't know if it's like even remotely realistic, as unrealistic as Harry Potter is, like Dumbledore is 10 times as unrealistic. So what do you do with that, I guess, is part of what I would ask, aside from like enjoying the story and finding entertainment in it.
Well, I would definitely strive towards it rather than trying to kill it. That would be my attempt. I mean, be measured by it. It's like, that's the game. If Dumbledore is so fantastically amazing, then he's a representation sort of the dominance hierarchy, and like measure yourself out against the great ones of the past, and that's the game. Or you can just resent the game, like Snape or Voldemort, and try and go outside it, but there's no other game. you know. So, you know, I take pleasure in the fact that there is someone like a Dumbledore represented in this text, someone to sort of keep us honest and teach us the value of honesty, but also the value of skill and of doing the right thing and at the right time. And also someone who's capable of bringing things together for you. When you say something, it often sparks a connection in his mind that he then shares with you in a very honest way. And so he sort of he embodies thought for you so that you can imitate his ability to think things through. And so he's, you know, like the eternal teacher and like super father in that way, that he is the father of all the children who come to Hogwarts, right? He helps to mold them. And so everybody loves Dumbledore. But that's a good thing to strive towards, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said, Alex, a while back about Harry being sort of this uncommon child, I think on the other hand, like, there is something about kids that has the capacity to, like, be both. I mean, obviously, biologically, they are the legacy of their parents, but also to, like, do different or do better than what their parent, or like perfect, I suppose.
Yes.
What their parents were. And that, I mean, that's right. That's part of the American dream, right? It's one element that seems to be fading more and more away, that people think, you know, people want to give their children better than they themselves had. And it's something that people see, polls suggest people think is less and less possible. But I think one of the things that's interesting about Harry is that he's able to be kind of like a confluence of father that he had, like biological father, but also a lot of the father figures. And I think it explains, for me at least, a little bit as to why Snape resents him so much, that Harry gets to do over certain things, and maybe do better than his dad did. But Snape doesn't get to undo or do better or do again. You know, he doesn't get a redo. He's stuck in high school. And maybe any redo that he gets is, he doesn't get credit for. He doesn't get anything that he makes better. He's not, for some reason, he either chooses not to. He either abdicates the opportunity, or he doesn't get public recognition for it. So it's almost like he, I can understand why that makes him resentful. Let's put it that way. He doesn't have kids either. I think that's,
well,
and any quote unquote, any kids that he's in charge of, they get bested by Harry all the time, right? Like, so it's almost as though the iterations are happening, but he continues to lose.
That's right. And it makes me think about how important, you know, the habits one builds as a young person are, because he's essentially the expression of the habits and the results of those habits in real time now.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of perpetual resentment at that perpetual loss of that which was most valuable to him. It again, even though there's a recurrence of time, it seems to indicate to me the importance of the present and the now, and of performing your best in the now. Absolutely, because it produces the future. And in the future, you know, you can be the hero or you can be the Snape, you know, and even if Snape comes to good things eventually, it's not an ideal path. And it's sort of a reverberation or a reiteration after reiteration of, you know, what he was already becoming in high school. And I don't know, it seems, you know, moments can be pivotal in life, and you never know when they're going to come upon you, and you should, you know, do your best to get the best out of pivotal moments, and especially the ones you can connect to. I feel like that's something I didn't get when I was young. Instead of sort of apathetically approaching moments and trying to take what's meaningful from them, approach every moment as if it's meaningful, and you know, you can actually make it more so, I think. And well, you know, maybe that's the difference between being at Hogwarts and being at the Dursleys, or something like that. Well, we're at the end of this text now. What do y'all want to conclude with?
Do you think we could maybe just at least note that the book begins and ends with owl posts, and like the first owl post is from Hedwig, this like stunningly, right? It's from Hedwig. I'm not crazy. And it brings him brings him his birthday present.
I think so.
And that it's like a recognition of you know, who he is in relation, which are a reflection of who he is in relationship to his friends. But Hedwig is like the alpha owl, right? She's stunningly beautiful and a little bit self-involved, and like she's just a beautiful owl. But the owl that happens there upon them in the Hogwarts Express is like, needless to say, not an alpha owl, is like a beta / gamma / owl in need of a lot of love.
So perfect for Ron.
So perfect for Ron, right? Kind of broken, right? But like good enough. And I think it's interesting that it begins and ends with owl post, and then the second chapter is about Aunt Marge, and Aunt Marge blowing up, right, and like becoming larger than life, and the second to last chapter is about Hermione's secret and like the way in which that affected her physically, and she kind of does the exact opposite, right, which is like make herself not known to other people while she's learning all of these things. And I just think like I'm really intrigued by what we've been talking about in the last few pods about childhood and adulthood, and given that they're like 13 on the precipice of 14, they're what in the United States we would call like 8th graders going into 9th grade, and that the books are about to get increasingly more dense and difficult, complex, dark. It strikes me as interesting that like the owl post at the end is not a beautiful owl post. I mean, it brings a lovely note, but it's a risky note, and the owl itself is like kind of sketchy, and it seems like there's a lot on the horizon that is unfinished or ambiguous or ominous, and that's part of what becoming a teenager is, that like things get broken and maybe they don't get put back together as well as they once were, or you realize that something isn't as pretty or perfect or simple as it seemed when you didn't really have any cause to question it, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's like the structure is noticeable, and then asking why that structural decision now is important to me.
It's like the shiny veneer of the Disney world, perfect father or perfect world which you have been provided as a child is beginning to fade away as you develop a more distinguishing consciousness, more capable of seeing, you know, the cracks in the image and the interplay between the ideal and that which is real. And it's as if that capacity is building in this young adolescent, you know, mind. And so the world in which he inhabits, this Hogwarts, is changing, becoming more complex, and the dark side is becoming better defined as well. And also his connection to it. Because the darkness in the world is, to some extent, a reflection of the darkness in you. That's the idea of Dante, when he has his characters, you know, criticize Florence for being a den of all vices, like malice and avarice. Well, those don't come from the dogs or the buildings. Those, you know, those terrible sins come from humans. And Plato says the same thing about the city. People call it an analogy, but I think it's just correct that the city is like a large version of a human soul. And it's like, well, yeah, the decisions of a city are made by the people within the city. So yes, they're human decisions. And so we're starting to get a more differentiated idea of what a human is, it seems like, as well as these books get more complex. And I'm interested too, Wes, because I really like this book because of that idea of, having the Godfather take you away to somewhere better, but dang, it doesn't quite happen. I really like the fourth book a lot too. I'm really looking forward to, the first 4 or so chapters at least, because like you said about us always taking it so long to get to Hogwarts in each book. It's 171 pages until Hogwarts in this one.
That's crazy. I remember it being like practically the length of one of the previous books, before you even get to Hogwarts. So how much should we read for next time? How drastically do you guys want to plunge into the Goblet of Fire here?
I really want to get back to the Burrow, at least. I want to get to 5 if possible. It's only 50 pages, and it gets us safely into a wizarding sanctuary, which I think is a good safe point here.
Right on.
Yeah. And something I just want to ask as a question or as a bookmark for next time is Lord Voldemort. I never noticed this. He calls Pettigrew Wormtail. A, how's he know that name? B, is that some cruel inversion of the friendship that, does he know that that's what his friends called Pettigrew, and now he calls him Wormtail to remind him of the fact that he's a traitor every time he refers to him? Oh, yeah. So I'm looking forward to next time.
Yeah, it's that's another thing that's from the beginning of the book here. You have that picture of Ron with his family and Scabbers on his shoulder or whatever, right? And that's how Sirius sort of figured it out also, that Pettigrew is still out there and that he had this mission that he had to, go and right the wrong, right? So that that use of recurring characters, like that's crucial to this story, and the way that Voldemort plays upon that is very unsettling, but also totally fitting, it seems to me.
Yeah. Well, y'all, until this next Thanksgiving week. Yes?
So wait, are we going to do chapters 1 through 4 or chapters 1 through 5?
1 through 4 to 5.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Got it.
All right.
Looking forward to it. See you guys.
See y'all.
Take it easy.